It would seem that for the first time since the 2022 shock election results, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagu may be reading from a different script from that of his boss. What? Or so it seems. If you're of this opinion, I need to ask you, are you sure? Are you sure that this is the real situation? Because, my friends, we have a government in our hands that is the most tricky, dodgy government our beloved motherland has ever had in its long history. And so you will agree with me that it could very easily be a trick to pretend that things are like this when they're actually like that. On my show today, we shall dive deep into this issue so that we totally understand. Even as the 17th of May, this Friday, looms in the horizon, very large, very huge, very threatening to William Samoei Ruto. And I believe already we have seen the signs that this government is in panic mode. But even more interesting and super fascinating is the reaction of members of House of Mumbi in this particular government. I'm telling you, Kenyan politics has just gotten very interesting. But I'm sure many of my younger subscribers may not have such a keen eye to notice very strange, very bizarre things happening. Yeah, as people anticipate the 17th of May 2024. A Mea community calls for a convention in Limuru. Just one community in Kenya. And then all hell breaks loose. People are running all over the place. Some are panicking. Some are going chini ya maji. Just one single community in our country of over 42 communities has called for a convention. What is the big deal? I believe we have to answer that question first, if we have any hope, any chance of understanding. Now, it is very instructive that every time we have had a president who does not hail from the House of Mumbi inside State House, they have had huge problems with the House of Mumbi. They have feared the House of Mumbi. They have made many decisions and done many things while warily looking at the House of Mumbi. When Kenya's second president, Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, ascended to the presidency, most Kenyans waited with bated breath to see who he would appoint as his number two. And it was clear to political observers at that time that Moi was really struggling to come to a decision. It took time. And when the decision was finally made, very elaborate steps were taken to introduce Moi's brand new vice president. Moi's right-hand man then, Charles Mugane Njonjo, called the owner and editor-in-chief of the Weekly Review to his office and gave him the scoop that Moi was about to appoint a man called Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki as his vice president. Now, why would the government do that? Why not just make the announcement? Well, it is pretty obvious that they were keen to gauge the reaction of Kenyans to this appointment even before it was made. And the big issue here, I don't know if I can call it the bone of contention, was the rivalry within the House of Mumbi between Kikuyus from Kiambu, the legendary home guards of the colonial government. The rivalry between the Kikuyus of Kiambu and those from Nyeri, home of the gallant Mau Mau freedom fighters, characters like Dedan Washihuri Kimathi. And of course it was not lost on the government that the previous regime of Mzee Jomo Kenyatta had treated Kikuyus from the Nyeri region very, very shoddily. A son of Nyeri, a man called Waruru Kanja, a political firebrand, had been jailed by Jomo Kenyatta in circumstances where it was very clear that it was a witch hunt, because the man came from a trip out of the country, and then shortly after that police raided his house and they found US dollars. Now in those days it was a very serious offense to be found with US dollars. You were only allowed to handle US dollars at the airport on your way out of the country. But as soon as you returned, you were supposed to surrender all US dollars. And so this politician had just kept some change, and that was seized and used to jail him. And while Mwai Kibaki remained one of the very, very few powerful people from Nyeri in Jomo's government, you can be sure he was not popular in his native Nyeri. And so you now see the appointment of Mwai Kibaki as Moi's very first vice president was not a simple open and shut case. It was a complex political move. And that is why the government felt it important to gauge the reaction, especially that of the Kikuyus from Nyeri. Put simply, the Kikuyus from Nyeri were at the forefront of fighting for Uhuru, while the Kikuyus from Kiambu were at the forefront of being home guards for the colonial government, collaborating with the colonial government. And of course they did not suffer the same way their compatriots from Nyeri suffered. But when we gained independence, what happened? Power was handed over to the Kiambu Kikuyus, Jomo Kenyatta and company, Kiambu Mafia, the kitchen cabinet of Jomo Kenyatta. Those are the people who ended up enjoying the fruits of independence, the fruits of Uhuru. Anyway, somewhere down the road, Kibaki started being popular in his native Nyeri and influential. And so Moi decided it was time to get a new vice president. And Moi's second vice president was also from the House of Mumbi, this time from Kiambu, a man called Dr. Josephat Karanja, who did not last long and was replaced by a man called Professor George Saitoti, who some think was a Maasai. Nothing like that. Actually, Professor Saitoti's full names were George Kenuthia Musengi Saitoti. These are the Kikuyus who fled to Maasai land to hide there, and there were very many who did this, so that they could be able to survive, get benefits like education, because the colonial government was clamping down too hard on the Agikoyo. But Moi's dictatorial regime was never comfortable with the House of Mumbi. And believe it or not, Even when Moi was very busy handling his succession, the House of Mumbi still proved to be a thorn in the flesh. Because from January 1998 to April 1999, over a year, the country did not have a vice president. Saitoti was reappointed only in April 1999, after a lot of pressure on Moi. And most of us will remember that in the run-up to the 2022 presidential elections, both major presidential candidates chose as a running mate somebody from the House of Mumbi. And so, this is not a problem that ended with Moi. It is still there to date. Raila Odinga chose Martha Karua, who was from the House of Mumbi, and William Samoei Ruto ended up choosing. Or did the man force himself into the position? Rigathi Gachagu, who is from Nyeri. And one thing should be very crystal clear. President William Samoei Ruto is having a headache with the House of Mumbi, which is strange because allegedly he received most of his votes from the Mount Kenya region. I'm not in the group of those people who believe that. Yeah, but officially, that is the position. But he's having very, very major problems with the House of Mumbi. And now you will understand why recent utterances and allegations about Deputy President Rigathi Gachagu and his closeness to the House of Mumbi, rather than his closeness to UDA, you will understand what all the fuss is about. Now, please let us understand one very important factor at play that has always been at play about the House of Mumbi. When push comes to shove, members of the House of Mumbi in a government will always lean back towards the interests of the House of Mumbi community rather than the interests of the government they serve. We have seen that play out over and over again in our history. And the best way to illustrate this is to look at one of the very, very few fatal mistakes Kenya's second president, Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, made. And this was the 1988 Mlolongo general elections. Yeah. Queue voting rather than secret ballot was used in the KANU primaries. And if you got over 70% of the vote, you became automatically elected. There would be no secret ballot election in that constituency. You know, looking back in history, it was the Mlolongo elections of 1988 that provoked the House of Mumbi to join the fight of the second liberation, to join it en masse. You see, Moi did exactly what Ruto did in 2017. Yeah. He decided to get rid of all the popular politicians, all the influential politicians from the Mount Kenya region. Yeah, because he would be safer then from this community that he had always feared. And so in those elections, members of the House of Mumbi went into it very terrified of being rigged out. And of course their fears were not unfounded. Moi tried to get Kibaki defeated in Othaya. The shorter queue was announced the winner by the district commissioner, who was the returning officer, somebody in government. And Kibaki's massive support in Othaya said no to this fraud, and they went home to collect their pangas. And frantic calls were made to Nairobi, KANU headquarters, and there was a lot of back and forth. Yeah, the DC had panicked and told KANU headquarters that in Othaya, kumedhoka, so much so that by the time Kibaki supporters returned with pangas, the election results were changed, and the DC made his second announcement, announcing Kibaki as the winner, and things cooled. In another constituency, which in those days was called Mbiri, these days it is called Kiharu, Kenneth Stanley Njindo Matiba was so wary that he had helicopters with photographers to take photographs, aerial photographs, showing his long queue and to distribute them widely, so much so that nobody would have the guts of announcing the shorter queue and the more favored candidate, a Dr. Julius Kiano, as the winner. And it worked. Matiba was back in parliament. Of course, at that time, Matiba was already a marked man, because on December 9th, 1988, Matiba had done the unthinkable. He had resigned from Moi's government. Of course, this was a slap on Moi's face, and the Kalenjin mafia could not take it. And so Matiba remained a marked man. And that is why, had he not hired those choppers and taken those photographs, he would have lost his Kiharu parliamentary seat, despite having a queue that was much longer than those of his opponents. I think now you'll understand how disgusted older voters of Kiharu are, that in a constituency with such history, such political history, the current member of parliament is Ndindi Nyoro, who is not only a close ally of William Ruto, but has castigated very strongly the upcoming 17th of May meeting at Limuru of the House of Mumbi. He has called it an attempt to incite tribal emotions against the government. Ndindi Nyoro, of course, reminds older voters from Ranga of another character very similar to him, called Joseph Kamotho, who was very close to Moi. Kamotho remained in Kanu up to the very last minute, even when virtually every major leader from the House of Mumbi had left Kanu for the opposition. And actually, we later discovered there was a very good reason for that. Kamotho could go nowhere. Why? Let me tell you a super fascinating story that will answer that question for you. When it became clear that Moi was going to choose Uhuru Kenyatta as his successor, when he left power in 2002, one of the people who went to see Moi to try and persuade him to change his mind was Bwana Kamotho, the then long-serving Secretary General of the KANU party. But the reaction Kamotho got from Moi was totally unexpected. Moi got very angry, and he told Kamotho, "Do you know, you would be rotting in jail if it hadn't been for me. So you must toe the line and accept my decision." Now it is unclear what Kamotho did that forced Moi to save him from jail. But those remarks from Moi, then president, that was clear blackmail. And so that is why Kamotho could go nowhere. Bottom line, when push comes to shove, the House of Mumbi will always come together from both sides of the political divide without fail. Now, please don't put words into my mouth. I'm not saying Gachagua has already crossed over. No. After all, who is Gachagua politically? Think about it. What kind of influence does he wield in the Mount Kenya region and in its politics? Very, very little, if any. But of course, Gachagua is ambitious, and he may want to be a sudden hero in the Mount Kenya region. And the way to do it is to fight the UDA government. And therefore, you cannot rule that out. You can't. And so his recent utterances on the one man, one shilling vote manenos has already warmed up Mount Kenya voters towards Rigathi Gachagu, and he must be feeling good. And so what he does next is unpredictable. Although, I must quickly add, we cannot rule out Ruto telling Rigathi Gachagu the same thing Moi told Joseph Kamoto. Let me leave it there. I'm sure you can work it out. Because going into the 2022 presidential elections, Bwana Gachagua had very, very serious criminal cases lined up against him, which of course vanished shortly after the UDA Kenya Kwanza government took power. Now, I very much appreciate that many of our younger audiences may not fully understand, and I must add even some of our younger politicians in the UDA government, Ndindi Nyoro, Kimani Ichung'wah, etc., etc., they may not fully understand the psyche, the DNA of the House of Mumbi. And that is why I would like to highly recommend a video I did some time back on the House of Mumbi, which lays bare a lot of those issues we have discussed on my show today, including the DNA, very strong DNA in members of the House of Mumbi for survival and for coming together in a crisis. And at the moment, you cannot deny that the House of Mumbi is in very deep crisis. Indeed, in my opinion, in the deepest crisis the community has ever been in, since the days of the colonial government. Now, if you're using a laptop, you will see the link right now at the top left-hand corner of your screens. Click on it, put that video aside, and you can take it in immediately we are through here. I have also repeated the same link in the description area below this video on YouTube. Make sure you take it in. It is very educative. And so Kenyans wait with bated breath for this Friday. For this Friday, 17th May, the year of our Lord, 2024. What is going to happen? What drama are we going to witness? Especially in this environment where political temperatures in the Mount Kenya region are extremely high. Anything can happen. If Rigathi Gachagu, the deputy president, would come out in support of the one man, one shilling, one vote agenda, something which William Ruto shut down very quickly when he took over the presidency, and a few members of the House of Mumbi in UDA tried to bring it up, and Ruto shut it down so quickly and so ruthlessly. Hiyo maneno sitaki kusikia. Now after that, Rigathi Gachagu comes out. Of all people, the person supposed to be closest to Ruto, and says he's supporting it, and makes the same complaint which is on the ground in the mountain, that it is very unfair in resource allocation to give the same resources to heavily populated counties of the Mount Kenya region that you give to sparsely populated regions, including some of them in the Rift Valley. This is a very hot political potato. Now, I have been convinced to extend slightly my latest offer on my highly sensitive special report on the General Ogolla assassination, which comes with all the other special reports, highly sensitive special reports, I had produced previously. You can see details on your screens right now. For only Kenya shillings 32.99 or $25, you can have this highly sensitive information, which is very relevant. It will be difficult for you to understand and to grasp what is unfolding, and even what will unfold on the 17th of May, whether or not that meeting takes place in Limuru, on the 17th of May and the days after, I highly recommend that you grab this chance, this final chance, which will only last until I produce my next video, which will be very, very soon. I think within 12 hours, because things are boiling in Kenya politically. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.